The shriek that pierced the air at 2:13 a.m. was one of pure disbelief, followed immediately by a whooshing roar of high-pressure water bursting through metal. Security camera footage would later show a woman, middle-aged, hair soaked and stuck to her face, glasses flung askew, slammed backward by a jet of water erupting from a pipe she'd just sawn through. Her name was Karen. She wore a poncho, garden gloves, and the satisfied smirk of someone who thought they were saving the world. Until the world punched back. In that moment, she hadn't just cut a water pipe, she'd severed a direct line to the town's emergency fire suppression system. Within 5 minutes, hydrants across the block lost pressure. Within 15, a house fire a few streets over had no water to fight it. Within 30, the fire chief was banging on my door, red-faced and furious, demanding to know why half the district's hydrants had gone dry on one of the hottest nights of the year. And all I could do was hit play on the footage, lean back, and say, "You're going to want to see this." It started the day before, during one of those hellish heat waves that makes asphalt sweat and people go a little mad. I was in my front yard adjusting the drip irrigation system I'd installed months ago. The city had been encouraging sustainable water solutions, and mine, crafted with input from a few buddies in the fire department, was state-of-the-art. It ran off a pressure-managed backup system that tapped into a permitted connection with the local emergency reservoir. Legal, efficient, and, as it turns out, extremely easy to misunderstand if you happen to be a nosy HOA board member with no actual credentials. I was crouched near a patch of drought-resistant saplings when I heard the unmistakable clack of wedge heels stomping down the sidewalk. Karen. In all her oversized sunglasses and canvas-tote glory. She walked like she owned the pavement. Her tote bag said, "Save every drop," in Comic Sans. Her expression was already curled into a judgmental grimace before she even reached my lawn. "Do you have any idea how irresponsible this is?" she snapped, pointing dramatically at the ground. "We're in a drought, and you're out here watering your weeds like it's Niagara Falls." I stood up slowly, trying not to laugh. "Karen, it's a drip system. Less than 2 gallons an hour. And it's using an auxiliary line from. I don't care if it's blessed by the Pope. It's illegal, and I'm reporting you to the HOA and the Water Conservation Board." "I already cleared it with both," I said calmly, tapping the laminated permit sign staked right next to the system control valve. She leaned in to squint at it like it might be counterfeit. "This looks fake. Anyone can print stuff these days. I'll be verifying this myself." I should have known then that things were going to escalate. But I was used to Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood was. She was the kind of woman who once made a teenager write a public apology for having a birthday party on a weeknight. The kind who called code enforcement on another neighbor because their mailbox was 1 inch too whimsical. But even Karen, I thought, wouldn't be bold, or foolish, enough to mess with city infrastructure. That night, I got a notification from my motion sensor security camera. I pulled up the feed, expecting to see a raccoon or maybe the neighbor's cat. What I saw was Karen, poncho on, flashlight in her mouth, toolbox in hand, crouched beside my emergency line like some suburban saboteur. She didn't even hesitate. She pulled out a saw and went to work on the pipe, muttering to herself about justice and eco-vigilance. The moment the blade hit the inner valve, the pipe exploded. Pressurized water blasted out like a geyser, knocking Karen flat on her back. She skidded across the grass, gasping and sputtering. Then she vanished from frame, crawling away like a soaked gremlin in retreat. I barely had time to process it when sirens started wailing. My phone buzzed, first the fire alert, then a call from the local station. There was a blaze not 5 blocks from us, and the hydrants were bone dry. They needed answers fast. When I opened the door, there stood Chief Daniels, a man who'd served with me for a decade and had never looked angrier. "What the hell did you do?" he growled. I brought him inside and played the footage. His expression changed from fury to disbelief to rage, but not at me. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, watching Karen's aquatic launch in slow motion. By morning, the entire neighborhood knew. Fire trucks had lined the block. City crews were inspecting every hydrant. Someone on Nextdoor leaked the video, and it spread like wildfire, pun fully intended. Karen didn't come out of her house all day. The HOA called an emergency meeting, not to discuss water conservation, but damage control. Karen tried to frame it as an accident, saying she thought the pipe was an illegal garden hose. But when the city confirmed that the emergency line was part of a backup fire suppression grid, legally authorized and municipally mapped, the board members started to backpedal hard. By sunset, the headlines were spreading. Local news called it a suburban Watergate. Twitter had memes. My favorite was one with Karen midair, superimposed with the caption, "When you try to save the earth but delete a hydrant instead." I wish I could say that was the end of it. But Karen wasn't done. And neither was the city. The fire chief wanted accountability. Insurance companies wanted someone to pay for the fire delay. And me? I wanted to know how far she'd go to keep pretending she was in the right. Turns out, pretty far. The morning after the explosion of water and the explosion of internet fame, I was awoken by the sound of two things I never enjoy hearing together: a doorbell and a very serious knock. When I opened the door, it was like staring at a wall of uniforms. 2 fire marshals, 1 city inspector, and a clipboard-wielding woman from the municipal legal department. Not a single one of them was smiling. And right behind them, arms crossed, jaw clenched, stood Chief Daniels. I gestured them in with the same politeness you reserve for tax auditors and bomb squads. They didn't sit. They didn't chit-chat. The first thing out of the legal woman's mouth was, "Do you know how close we came to a total hydrant failure in your zone last night?" I nodded. Pretty close, I'd say. About 1 Karen away. That didn't get a laugh. But the video footage did. After they finished watching Karen's midnight plumbing escapade, all of them were trying not to chuckle, except the chief, who looked like someone had parked a truck on his patience. Still, he turned to the others and said, "There's your cause." It wasn't sabotage from inside the system, it was suburban sabotage. She cut a pressurized emergency line, and the loss cascaded through 3 junctions. The inspector added that the city had authorized my system 2 years ago under the fire department's community auxiliary program, meaning Karen had not just tampered with private property, she disrupted an emergency pipeline under municipal jurisdiction. The woman with the clipboard underlined that several times. This is a city matter now. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's shutters were closed tighter than a bank vault. I could imagine her pacing around, clutching her HOA binder like a legal shield, wondering just how bad it was going to get. The answer, pretty bad. A few hours later, a city van rolled up and taped a bright orange notice to her front door. It was a cease and desist from the Public Works Department and a formal notice of investigation for interference with city infrastructure. Less than 10 minutes after that, the HOA held a closed-door emergency meeting, probably to figure out how fast they could throw her under the bus without getting dragged with her. The real fun started that afternoon when Karen tried to spin the situation. She came out, hair curled, blouse starched, and her most fake-friendly smile glued to her face, just as a local news crew showed up for an interview. Apparently, she'd invited them. "This neighborhood is under siege," she declared dramatically in front of her garden gnome collection, "by selfish individuals who put their landscaping above the survival of our planet. I was merely investigating a suspected illegal water connection." I watched this on the live feed, a garden hose slung over my shoulder, sipping lemonade like I was at a backyard theater. But the reporters didn't buy it. Not when they had footage. Not when the city inspector gave a brief statement immediately after her saying the water system she cut into was legally approved and part of a firefighter auxiliary plan. "So you're saying the person who cut the line wasn't just wrong, they endangered lives?" the reporter asked. The inspector nodded. Karen's smile twitched. It was a beautiful moment. That evening, the HOA president showed up at my doorstep, visibly sweating despite the breeze. "Just wanted to say we had no idea she'd do something that extreme," he stammered. "She acted outside her authority." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't she get access to my side yard with a board-issued key?" His face paled. He hadn't expected that question. "Technically, yes, but we assumed it was for a visual inspection, not sabotage." I let him sweat for a moment longer before replying. "Good thing I keep my security footage backed up to the cloud. All angles, all timestamp. I'm sure the court will appreciate it." He left faster than he arrived, muttering something about liability coverage and resigning committee members. Karen, meanwhile, tried once again to double down. She filed a complaint with the Water Conservation Board, claiming I was operating an unregistered irrigation system, and that I had threatened her civil liberties by installing dangerous pipes. Unfortunately for her, the Water Board responded with a public statement saying they'd already reviewed and approved the setup 2 years prior, and warned residents not to tamper with municipal link systems. That wasn't just a denial. That was a slap in an official envelope. But Karen wasn't done flailing. She brought in her own so-called expert, a man in a wrinkled polo who introduced himself as a licensed irrigation consultant. He did an on-camera interview in front of her hydrangeas claiming that my pipe setup was clearly a threat to public safety. What he didn't mention was that his license had been suspended 4 years earlier for falsifying backflow reports. And wouldn't you know it, someone on Reddit found the documents within 24 hours. The meme that followed, his face photoshopped onto a sprinkler with the caption, "Certified Clownflow Expert," went viral fast. The city, now under public pressure and mounting anger from the fire department, opened an official investigation not only into Karen's actions but also into whether the HOA board had overstepped legal boundaries by granting her access to residential spaces without homeowner consent. The city attorney confirmed this was a serious issue, one that could involve civil penalties and administrative overhaul of the entire HOA structure. In other words, the HOA wasn't just distancing themselves from Karen anymore. They were building a catapult to launch her as far from their legal line of fire as possible. Meanwhile, Karen's world was beginning to crack. Anonymous flyers started appearing on her lawn with slogans like, "Snitches get soaked," and "Hydrant lives matter." Someone hung a plastic poncho on her mailbox. Another neighbor stuck a sign in their yard that said, "Watered legally, unlike our HOA." The homeowners, once indifferent, were now rallying against her. And me? I had a front row seat. Every day brought something new. A lawyer from the city dropped off deposition paperwork. A public safety hearing was scheduled. A group of firefighters asked if they could use my yard for a community safety demonstration. And in the middle of it all, Karen made one final mistake. She tried to speak at the HOA town hall. She walked in, clutching a stack of papers, and declared herself a whistleblower. But before she could say more than 3 sentences, the president of the HOA interrupted her with a lawyer at his side and said, "You are no longer recognized by this board." The room clapped. Someone even booed. Karen turned bright red, threw the papers in the air like she was storming off a courtroom set, and left. As I watched her slam the door behind her, I couldn't help but think, this was just the beginning. The storm was still building. And I had the high ground, the legal documents, and about 400,000 views online cheering me on. You said. Just when the neighborhood thought it had seen the last of Karen's delusions, she returned with a vengeance, wearing a smug expression and dragging behind her what she probably believed was her ultimate weapon, a stack of printed-out social media posts, color-coded files, and a man who introduced himself as Dr. Burton, water risk analyst. She made her grand reappearance 3 days after being kicked out of the HOA town hall, this time accompanied by her so-called expert and a local online news blogger who seemed far too excited to film anything involving neighborhood drama. Karen, still convinced she was the eco-savior of the century, had decided that public sympathy was all she needed to flip the narrative. Unfortunately for her, facts and karma had already beaten her to it. She set up a makeshift press conference on her own driveway, complete with a folding table, a potted plant centerpiece, and a giant poster board with the words "Water Justice Now" hand-painted in what looked suspiciously like leftover children's finger paint. Her expert, Dr. Burton, shuffled forward to speak first. He cleared his throat like he was about to present Nobel Prize-winning research, then began to lecture the handful of curious neighbors who had wandered over. Based on my extensive analysis of local pressure systems and non-standard pipe flows, he said, holding up a laser pointer that didn't seem to work, it is evident that this homeowner's irrigation setup presented a clear and present danger to the city's plumbing integrity. He was pointing vaguely at my house, where I was watching from behind a screen door, eating a popsicle. I didn't even flinch when he added, "In my professional opinion, the pipe Karen intervened on was an illegal bypass, likely constructed without certified oversight." One of the older neighbors, a retired plumber named Phil, raised an eyebrow and asked, "You got a license, Doc?" Burton straightened up. "I was licensed. Temporarily suspended due to bureaucratic disagreements." That was enough to send Phil and half the crowd into a chorus of snickers. Karen, undeterred, pulled out a stack of manila folders and began handing them to whoever would take one. Inside were screenshots from Reddit, blurry photos of my lawn, and a wildly inaccurate diagram labeled "Illegal Pipeline Scheme." Just when Karen looked like she might gain an inch of ground, the real blow landed. A city vehicle pulled up and parked with authority, tires hissing. Out stepped the municipal legal rep, the same woman who'd been at my house days earlier. She didn't walk toward Karen. She walked straight to me and handed me a copy of the city's formal findings. "Loud enough for Karen and her audience to hear," she said. "The system you installed has been reviewed and confirmed again as compliant. It's part of the Fire Auxiliary Reserve Grid, officially maintained through our Urban Fire Resilience Initiative. Thank you for your cooperation, and your documentation has been extremely helpful." Karen turned white. Her jaw dropped, eyes darting between the city official and the crowd that had turned from curious to entertained. Then came the final nail. Another neighbor, a young guy named Trey who worked in digital marketing, casually stepped forward with his tablet and said, "You guys might want to see this." He tapped the screen, and up popped a slideshow of Karen's past antics, including screenshots of her threatening a neighbor over garden flamingos, a complaint she filed about someone's wind chimes, and, best of all, a video clip of her snatching a solar light from someone else's yard, thinking it was hers. The crowd laughed so hard the blogger's camera shook. Karen tried to respond but ended up sputtering. That video was edited. Taken out of context. I was framed by malicious landscaping choices. Even Dr. Burton was slowly stepping away from her now, mumbling something about needing to recheck his data. It was clear to everyone, even the people who hadn't taken sides yet, that Karen's credibility had drowned in the very water she claimed to protect. But she wasn't finished. Later that night, a new chapter in Karen's unraveling unfolded when she posted a lengthy Facebook rant titled, "The Real Story: What They Don't Want You to Know." In it, she claimed that the city was in cahoots with Big Irrigation, that I was a plant sent to infiltrate the HOA by a firefighter water cartel, and that the pressure blast that soaked her was likely a setup involving military-grade sprinklers. The post went viral in the worst way possible. Commenters from all over tore it apart with meme responses and joke conspiracy theories. One person photoshopped her onto a tidal wave shouting, "Hydrate me, Karen." Another put her face on a fire hydrant with the caption, "Public Enemy Hose Number 1." Meanwhile, the city had moved into official litigation prep. They requested all security footage, emails, and HOA memos relating to her unauthorized entry. The fire department submitted an impact report detailing how her interference had nearly compromised emergency response timing during the house fire across town. It turned out the delay cost over $60,000 in additional damage, and they wanted someone held responsible. Even worse for Karen, the HOA board, now in full survival mode, issued a formal disavowal of her actions and suspended her membership. She wasn't just removed from the board, she was publicly banned from representing the HOA in any capacity. It came with an official notice, signed by all 6 current board members, and posted on the HOA community portal where the comments quickly exploded. About time. Can we replace her garden gnomes with a fountain of truth? Let's all chip in for a water safety mural, with her at the bottom. And yet, despite everything, Karen still showed up the next morning with sunglasses and a folder. This time, she tried a different tactic. She approached me directly, on my property, and asked for a private conversation about resolution. I was polite but firm. You trespassed, tampered with emergency infrastructure, and endangered people's lives. There's nothing to discuss. She tried again. If you drop your claims, I'll issue a public apology. We can even frame it as a misunderstanding. I stepped back and looked her in the eye. You didn't misunderstand. You broke the law. Now the law's coming for you. And with that, she turned, muttered something under her breath about defamation, and walked off with a defeated shuffle. I could tell she knew the tide had turned completely. She wasn't the eco-hero of her fantasies. She was the punchline, the soggy saboteur, the very reason every pipe in the neighborhood now had a fresh, "Do Not Tamper" sign, laminated and city-issued. But the real twist was still to come. The city wasn't just going after her. They had uncovered something much bigger buried in HOA records, something that would make Karen look like the symptom, not the disease. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday, but the City Hall conference room was packed like a courtroom drama finale. Cameras were set up on tripods, reporters took notes with the intensity of war correspondence, and HOA members sat rigidly in folding chairs like students waiting for detention. At the center of it all sat Karen, her hair styled in a tight bun, a stack of notes in front of her, and a face trained to look innocent. But the confidence she once flaunted was now hollow. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he had aged 10 years in 1 week, kept whispering into her ear, probably hoping she wouldn't speak and make things worse. The reason for this hearing wasn't just her waterline stunt anymore. The city had uncovered something much deeper. Records showing the HOA board had been issuing access keys, bypassing resident consent, and encouraging certain members to perform unofficial inspections. Karen hadn't acted alone. She was part of a pattern. The fire hydrant incident had cracked open a vault of misconduct. One city auditor likened it to finding termites in a wall. You think it's one rotten plank until you peel it back and see the whole structure is infested. Evidence emerged that Karen and a few of her allies had entered at least 6 other properties over the last 2 years, always under the guise of enforcement, always without homeowner permission. In 2 cases, they tampered with landscaping. In one, they took photos of a neighbor's backyard hot tub and used them to issue a bogus violation. This wasn't just an isolated Karen moment anymore. It was organized harassment under the banner of a clipboard and HOA badge. When the floor opened to public comments, it was like unleashing a storm that had been building for years. First was Mr. Ellis, the elderly veteran who told the room how Karen had once screamed at him for putting up a flag on Memorial Day without HOA design approval. Then came Denise, a single mom whose garden Karen reported for unauthorized use of decorative gravel. And then, quiet but devastating, was Maria, who showed pictures of her toddler's birthday party ruined when Karen called in a noise complaint for the sound of a bubble machine. With each story, the pressure mounted. It became clear that the real crime wasn't just the hydrant, it was the abuse of power that had gone unchecked. The city attorney stood and laid it out flat. The HOA had been operating in the gray, stretching their authority into something resembling a private patrol force. And Karen had been their most aggressive agent. Her actions, while dramatic, had become the perfect example of everything broken in how the HOA handled enforcement, power, and common sense. A motion was introduced to dissolve the current HOA leadership structure, revoke all active inspection authorizations, and place the board under temporary city supervision pending re-election. The vote passed unanimously. Karen tried to protest. Her lawyers stood up and argued that she had only been trying to protect neighborhood resources. But the judge overseeing the proceedings wasn't impressed. She quoted directly from the city code, highlighting how Karen's actions had not only endangered public safety but also exposed the HOA to massive liability. Then came the financial reckoning. The city fire department submitted a bill, over $70,000 in damages related to delayed response time, equipment recalibration, and hydrant pressure testing across the grid. The HOA would have to pay it, and thanks to her involvement, Karen was personally named in a portion of the claim. Her eyes widened, her lawyer whispered frantically, and for the first time since this started, she looked genuinely panicked. But that was just the legal fallout. The social one was already well underway. In the following days, the neighborhood transformed in the most ironic way imaginable. Yard signs started popping up that read, "Watered responsibly," and "Karen-free zone." Someone installed a mock fire hydrant on their lawn with a plastic Karen doll zip-tied to it. A local bar renamed one of its drinks the Karen Sprinkler, rum, soda, and a splash of fire. The meme pages kept going, and people from across the state followed the story like it was a TV series. In a meeting of poetic justice, the fire department asked if they could host a community appreciation event in my yard, same yard Karen had tried to sabotage. I said yes. They set up tents, brought food trucks, and parked a full-sized ladder engine out front. Families came out with kids, neighbors mingled freely, and the city handed me a commendation plaque for supporting emergency infrastructure. A muralist painted a small section of the retaining wall with the words, "Integrity holds pressure," the phrase the fire chief had used to describe how my pipe system had held up even under Karen's sabotage. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she had retreated indoors, only venturing out once with sunglasses and a hoodie to grab her mail. But the damage was done. Not just to her reputation, but to her whole belief that she could weaponize rules and fear without consequence. The best part? The HOA, in trying to protect themselves, had agreed to a settlement with me to avoid a full civil trial. The terms were glorious. Lifetime exemption from HOA fees. Full public apology. A new privacy fence installed at their expense. And an agreement that no HOA member, now or in the future, could access my property without written consent and a city permit. The final flourish came in the form of a letter I received one crisp afternoon. It was hand-delivered and stamped with the HOA's seal. Inside was a formal declaration. I was now exempt from all visual inspections for the next 20 years, my property officially designated as Community Support Infrastructure Adjunct, meaning they couldn't even ask me to trim a hedge without filing city paperwork. I framed the letter and hung it above my fireplace, but just below it I also framed something else. The screenshot of Karen midfall, drenched in water, eyes wide, arms flailing. The storm had passed. The system had corrected. And in a rare twist of suburban fate, justice had flowed like water, unrelenting, cleansing, and loud enough to shake every pipe in the block. But I had a feeling Karen hadn't given up completely. People like her don't just disappear. They regroup. And next time, it wouldn't be a pipe she cut. It would be something quieter, sneakier. That's why I kept my cameras running. Just in case. The months that followed were quieter than I ever expected. The neighborhood returned to its sleepy rhythm, sprinklers gently hissing in the early mornings, kids riding bikes down the sidewalk again without fear of Karen yelling at them about helmet reflectors or sidewalk chalk violations. The HOA, now rebuilt from scratch with new leadership, kept their distance. The fire department even came by occasionally to check the hydrant system, always thanking me for helping expose the flaw in their auxiliary infrastructure that had gone unnoticed for years. Everything felt stable again, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't entirely over. Karen was still out there, stewing, and people like her don't vanish. They simmer until they find a new match to strike. It came in the form of a lawsuit, or at least what she believed would be one. A thick envelope arrived on my doorstep, hand-delivered by a courier who looked more confused than concerned. Inside was a stack of poorly formatted legal documents, titled in shaky bold letters, "Petition for emotional damages due to cyberbullying, loss of social standing, and defamation by water." Yes, she actually wrote that. She was suing me for emotional trauma caused by the video of her getting blasted by the hydrant-linked pipe and for the social media fallout that followed. She claimed the footage had ruined her life, made her a local punchline, and left her unable to show her face at Pilates. The claim was so absurd that my lawyer laughed out loud when I showed it to him. He said, "This isn't even a lawsuit, it's a sad diary entry formatted in Word." But because she had filed it in small claims court and listed a series of supporting exhibits, I still had to show up. The court date was set for a Thursday afternoon. When I walked into the room, there she was, wearing all black as if she were attending a funeral. Her lawyer, apparently the only person in town willing to represent her after everything, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She stood and made a dramatic case about how she had been unfairly portrayed as a villain, that she was merely trying to protect the community, and that I had weaponized hydration against her. Then it was my turn. I played the same video the city had already seen 100 times, the same one that had been reviewed and cleared by every department. I presented the permits, the fire department's statement, and the cease and desist from Public Works. I also brought in printed copies of Karen's own Facebook rants, especially the one where she claimed I was part of a firefighter water cartel. The judge looked through the evidence slowly, then finally leaned forward and asked, "Ms. Reynolds, did you or did you not cut through a clearly marked emergency water line?" Karen squirmed. "I misunderstood the pipe. I thought it was a misuse." The judge raised an eyebrow. "So you admit you physically trespassed and tampered with another person's water infrastructure during a drought, which resulted in municipal impact?" Karen hesitated, then muttered, "Yes." But the reaction was disproportionate. The judge dismissed the claim with a sigh and added a note to the record stating the suit was frivolous. He warned her that any further attempts to file baseless litigation could result in penalties. Karen's face was tight, pale, her lips pressed into a fine line. She didn't even look at me as she left the courtroom. But as she stepped through the door, a woman waiting outside held up a phone and asked, "Are you the hydrant lady?" Karen turned and stormed down the hallway without answering. I thought maybe that would be the last of it, the final, sputtering gasp of a saga that should have ended months ago. But the neighborhood had one more surprise in store. A week after the court hearing, I was invited to the HOA's first ever Resident Appreciation Day, now an annual event created in response to the Karen disaster. The new board had turned over a new leaf completely, friendly, transparent, and focused on actual community building rather than dictating mailbox colors. They asked me to cut the ribbon on a new shared garden, built in the green space near the fire hydrant Karen had indirectly disabled. A plaque had been installed, commemorating the incident not with spite, but with humor and honesty. It read, "This garden is watered by responsibility, not revenge. In memory of a very wet lesson." Below it, a bronze hydrant sculpture stood proudly with a little hose coiled at the base. I couldn't help but smile. Somehow, the chaos had birthed something good. That afternoon, the fire department made one last appearance. They drove through the neighborhood in a slow loop, sirens chirping in celebration. At the center of the convoy, riding shotgun in the lead engine, was Chief Daniels, who gave me a salute as they passed my driveway. Behind them, residents waved, kids tossed biodegradable confetti, and music played from speakers hooked up to solar panels. It wasn't just a party. It was a turning point. The neighborhood had been through a kind of civil war in miniature. Rules versus reason, power versus principle, and it had come out better on the other side. And Karen? She moved out 2 months later. The listing on her house said, quiet corner lot with newly repaired plumbing and fresh paint. It didn't mention the infamous pipe, the viral video, or the HOA revolution. But the buyers probably figured it out eventually. You can't erase a reputation like that from the internet. Not when the story had made it to late-night news and racked up millions of views under hashtags like #HydrantKaren and #PressureJustice. I kept the footage saved, not to gloat, but to remind myself what happens when people think rules only apply to others. And as for the waterline itself, it was now reinforced with double casing, officially catalogued in the city's infrastructure map, and equipped with a pressure alert that pings my phone and the fire station simultaneously. The irony never left me, though, that someone so obsessed with control had lost it all by cutting into something she didn't understand. Karen had tried to make a statement. What she made instead was history. Suburban legend, caught on camera, archived in city records, and forever etched in the minds of everyone who watched her go flying through the air on a stream of justice, high pressure, and cold.